morning again, everyone. I want to take the time to thank some folks. I think BFEC has done a tremendous job with the organization. Ian Barker, managing the department. But more than anything else, I'm thrilled we have almost every district in the state here. And I know many of you, and I'm very grateful that you're here in attendance. My name is Mary Jane Tappan, for those of you I have not met, and I hope I do meet you. I'm the Deputy Chancellor for Curriculum, Instruction, and Student Services. And the purpose of this particular meeting today is that we've heard from many folks, many districts, that are concerned about implementing the Common Core and concerned that all of you are out there by yourselves trying to figure this out. And wouldn't it make more sense if the districts worked together, shared some best practices, shared some professional development, got to listen to each other's plan to get some ideas, and build off each other's strengths? So that's the purpose of today. And we started out with sending out an email to collect volunteers. So I want to emphasize volunteers to present today on the plans for implementing the Common Core in their district. And we had 6 very gracious volunteers, and I hope that we're very appreciative of their services today, who are going to share their plans with you, and I'll speak a little more about that in a little while. But I also have the privilege, and I'm very excited to have the opportunity to introduce a special person to you this morning. As you know, the department has a new leader, and this leader comes with a tremendous amount of energy, very positive energy, about kids, about instruction, and trust me, he has a laser-like focus on instruction. So our new commissioner, who's a father of triplets, and a couple other kids, a daughter who teaches, so he understands having children in the system. He's been a teacher, an administrator. In fact, he was a superintendent when his children were in the system, so you can only imagine having kids in the system. So he pays close attention. He's been a commissioner, and he understands what leading a state is all about. And he understands the importance of ensuring that all our students have access to rigorous coursework and quality instruction. So it's with great privilege I introduce to you our new Commissioner of Education, Mr. Dr. Tony Bennett.
Good morning. It's good to be in, well, I better move this down. It is wonderful to be in Florida. My wife and I are now settled. We sold our home in Indiana. I can't say we are real estate tycoons by any stretch of the imagination, but we did get rid of it, and we are here and loving it. So, you know, it's great to now live in a place where your kids want to come and see you. And bring your grandkids. So a little bit just about me, and Mary Jane mentioned this. First, I am a biology and science teacher. Got a clap in the back, thank you. Let's hear it for mitosis, right? I spent years as a high school basketball coach in Indiana, which it's kind of a rite of passage in Indiana. And have been a principal, an assistant principal. I ran a career in the Tech Ed Center for 9-12 students. Been assistant superintendent and district superintendent. Now, my mom and dad would tell you I can't hold a job, but I will tell you I've really been in every chair of education. And I started in 1983, which gives me a very unique perspective, because if we want to wind back the clock, let's remember what happened just before 1983. Nation at risk, right? So I think I have had that unique perspective of really seeing just about every major initiative come through education that, you know, at least in my lifetime that we've seen, for all the reasons that have been talked about, all the education reform that's been talked about. And I would suggest to you that, in my opinion, the one we are embarking on, the one we're talking about today, may have the greatest long-term impact on our students. So I want you to know that. And I was going to title, I was talking to Mary Jane before we started. She said she'd gotten numerous questions from many of you about where I stand on Common Core, because being from Indiana, if you've read any of the blogs, if you've read any of the news, you know that Indiana is putting a halt to the implementation of Common Core. We had some questions about that. We've had questions about PARC. And I said, Mary Jane, we ought to just call my part of this presentation Dispelling the Rumors. So we'll do that. I'm going to make some very brief remarks about Common Core, about the implementation of Common Core, the direction of Common Core, talk a little bit about PARC, and then I want this to be as informal as you want it to be, in that I want to open it up to Q&A. I do have the perspective of someone who has been driving the PARC assessments since their inception. In 2010, I served on the governing board. Indiana was handling procurements while I was still in Indiana. And we were very committed to that. So I think I can talk to you about that. And, you know, Florida being the fiscal agent, I am still intimately involved to the point where we had to finalize our last contract yesterday with Indiana to pull the procurements back from Indiana because they are not participating. So I think I can answer about any question you want. I have also, just to dispel the rumor, I have debated for Common Core in every corner of this country against our opponents. So I want you to leave here with, make no mistake, there is probably not another state chief in the country who is more committed to the implementation, the successful implementation of this initiative than I am. Okay, I believe it is transformational. And I need you to hear that. I often say this. There are three things that when Common Core was first conceptualized, we were really trying to do three things. The first thing was to transform student learning. Going back to that early 1980s, we have talked about the need for the transformation of learning for many years. So the first reason that we came about this idea was to transform the learning experience for students, to make our students true problem solvers, to make them true masters of content, the most important content to be college and career ready. And then we got to the second reason and we said, if we're going to transform student learning, we have to transform something else. The way teachers teach. So the second thought was, let's transform learning through the transformation of the instructional experience of teachers. And the third transformation was how we analyze how learning occurs and how teaching is taught, which is where you get PARC in Florida's landscape. So it's the transformation of learning through the transformation of teaching, and checking the transformation of learning and the transformation of teaching through the transformation of student analytics or evaluation or assessment, as we know it, PARC. That's all it was. It's not a government takeover of education. All it was an intentional effort to do those three things. And we were going to do those three things by honoring, for the first time in my education history, what I believe to be three time-tested necessities in education. And those three time-tested necessities in education were, we needed to internationally benchmark our children. A lot of discussion around the country about, are our kids up to the international competition? Is our instruction equal to or better than instruction in our competing countries? So we, for the first time, did something that was very important, is we internationally benchmarked standards. Now, when you go back to your communities and people want to use these two phrases together, as politely as possible, stop them. Common Core curriculum. These are standards. These are standards. This is not a curriculum. Which led to the ill-informed, misintentioned, or I should say misinformed and ill-intentioned, decision in Indiana to pull out because they believe that this is a nationalized initiative. So, it is, one, internationally, they are internationally benchmarked. Two, it is a state-led initiative. Going back to 2006, 2007, the National Governors Association, the Council for Chief State School Officers came together and said, let's internationally benchmark standards in English language arts and math so our children will really get the benefit of being internationally competitive. And given the fact that constitutionally education is our obligation as a state, it's only right that the states did this and they voluntarily adopted it. So internationally benchmarked, state-driven, and I think the most important, this is locally controlled. Go back to the idea that this is not a curriculum. There has been nothing, in my opinion, that has happened in education reform that honors the creativity of the classroom and the local control of curriculum instruction better than Common Core. When people tell you, talk to you about teaching to the test, this is the best initiative we have to counter that discussion. So internationally benchmarked, state-driven, locally controlled. Transforming, learning, teaching, and analysis. Now, I am going to submit to you, and I'm going to be very brief now, and I'm going to get into Q&A. I'm going to submit to you this. We've got to get this right, and that's where you come in. If we don't get this right, and I see a lot of people out there who look like they might be my age or maybe just a teeny bit older, think about our educational experiences and how many times you've been through standards adoptions in your districts or at the state level. And what was that experience like? Exciting, right? We immediately got in there and it's just, we were trying to figure out how it was going to transform the experience of children in our classrooms. If we don't get this right, this will look like another standard adoption activity. And if we truly want to transform learning and teaching, it can't be that. So we need your help. We need your help, and I'll be a little bit of a PR guy here. We have to capture the hearts and minds of our teachers. And you know what? I submit to you across the country, throughout this state, no criticism of Mary Jane, no criticism of Pam or Gerard or Eric or anyone before me, because the same criticism could be held of me in Indiana. Across the country, we have done a very poor job of that. Be very real. We've done a very poor job of that. I would ask you at some point today to have a conversation with your colleagues and ask your colleagues, have this discussion. Do our teachers really understand the transformative effect of this initiative? Do our teachers really understand how different their instruction will have to look? Do our teachers really understand the type of creativity, interdisciplinary, innovative approaches they can bring to the classroom if they have a true mastery of what they're going to be doing under Common Core? And do our teachers understand that since 1983, I think we're embarking on something that will put back why the classroom teacher got into education. I truly believe that in my heart. But I have to ask you, how many of your teachers know that, feel that, believe that, and are living that? And we need your help in getting that message out, and we're going to be very focused about that in the weeks and months to come. because this is transformative for the teacher and for the student, and we've got to get that out. The other thing we need your help with is how do we get that out to parents in the business communities? Much, much more will be expected of our children. I would suggest you YouTube David Coleman, the architect of the language arts standards, and the current president of the College Board, and watch David's delivery of the Gettysburg Address lesson and the letters from Birmingham jail lesson using Common Core. A very different discussion. And it will be very difficult for many parents and business leaders to understand this difference. You may also want to pull up the archive. I think it was House of Representatives hearing last week, 2 weeks ago, where we Skyped David in to talk about what was needed for students to have to meet Common Core standards in mathematics. Very enlightening and intriguing discussion. We need your help with that. So what I'm trying to tell you is we need your help as a department, and you need to push us to come to your communities, help you spread the word. We need to think about a marketing plan so that I believe Florida will do, should do what it did in reading, where the state owned the initiative. This will be successful if we convince Florida to own the initiative. That is my transitioning plan. That's my vision for where we are going forward. It will be daunting. I'll dispel a couple more rumors and then we'll open it up to Q&A. One, do I see the need to delay? The answer to that is no. I do not see the need to delay, and I have made that as clear as possible to our legislators. Let's not delay. I believe delaying implementation will be a greater detriment to the future of the Common Core than anything we do. We don't need to delay. And we will, as a department, focus ourselves on this initiative as, in Mary Jane's words, with a laser focus. I promise you that. I want to introduce you to someone who's with us. You will be hearing from her. You will see a lot of her. I'll ask her to stand up. Her name is Anna Schultz. Anna, would you mind standing up? Anna came with us from Indiana. She's an Indiana Teacher of the Year. She took on our reading initiative. We scaled it to 292 districts. We didn't have the luxury of being able to put all our districts in one room. And we scaled it to 292 districts on Anna's back. She and one other person. She has taken this on, and I promise you, she will drive this train very hard, very fast, and she will be a great resource for you. So be sure you see her, talk to her throughout the day. So with that, I'm going to conclude, and I want you to feel free to ask any question you want to ask. And the only thing I would ask is I do have one kind of housekeeping rule. My name is Tony. I have learned one thing. There's a big difference between Florida and Indiana. In Indiana, we are a lot less formal. Okay, I was called a lot of things. Commissioner or superintendent was rarely in the title. So I just appreciate that type of informal dialogue. I'm not a guy who believes in titles. So we got a wireless mic. Raise your hand and let's learn from each other and let's have dialogue. You can ask about park. You can ask about the Plan B discussion we've had. I'll go into that in great detail if you want. But you can ask whatever you want to ask. So this is your time. Don't be shy. Got to read. Yes, ma'am, in the very back. Hold on, we're going to bring you a mic so everyone can hear.
Thank you. I have a question because, as you know, right now the districts across Florida are working together to build assessments for all of our courses, many of which contain the Common Core standards as well as the Next Generation standards. What type of support do you plan on providing the districts as we continue through this initiative?
In terms of the assessment process, it's a great question. In that, one of the things I think we have to do, and this goes right to the heart, and I'm not going to get into the weeds about park unless somebody asks me that direct question. I'm trying to prompt you to do that here. But one of the things I think we have to do is give you a very clear picture of the difference between the type of questions that occur in assessments that are characteristic of PARC or Common Core assessments versus what you may have been used to in looking at assessments that you have seen in FCAT. So one of the very first things we're going to try to do is get item samples to you so that as you build those, you have a clear understanding of the type of questioning that students will be exposed to in PARC assessments. I think that's the first thing we have to do. Because as you think through that process of building assessments, I'll say this, the last thing we want to do is end up with FCAT 3.0. Am I right? So, I say that not just about moving from FCAT to PARC, but also in building your local assessments. So I think that's number one, and we are going to be out there a lot with item banks and working toward that to help you. The other thing I would talk about is this, and I'm thinking while I'm talking, and as you guys get to know me, you'll find out that's a very dangerous combination. In looking at all of the courses available, I think you have to ask yourself which of those courses are really offered in your districts. I went through, I was doing this little mental exercise the other night with our Deputy Chief of Staff, Will Krebs, who came with me, and we were looking at all the PARC courses. And there were a lot. And I wonder how many of those art courses really demand a different assessment. I think we have to have those types of discussions as well, and I think that's a place where we can be of help. We're going to give you a workout.
I didn't have mine this morning. This is it, up and down. Good morning.
Good morning.
The Orlando Sentinel recently came out with an article that talked about the park being potentially 6 to 10 days longer to assess than the current FCAT. For those of us in high school, I figured out there's about a 3-month window without any assessments. And is there any discussion about an extended school year or an extended school day so we have more time to teach?
Wow. Now that is my phone, and it's Friday Night Lights. Did you put that aside? I apologize. Yes. I would. It's a really. You're the first person that's asked about asked that question in that context. I think I have heard a lot of discussion, and I will tell you that is probably one of the things I'm used to. I don't want to put myself in a position to second guess legislation. Being here grand total of 7 weeks. I know you guys have kind of the set start date thing in Florida, and I understand why. In Indiana, we didn't. We had more of a balanced calendar. Your question doesn't go to balanced calendar. It really goes to a longer school year. And I have to tell you, I haven't heard that. I would suggest to you, though, that test time is one of the discussions we're having around the alternative plan. I mean, it's truthfully, I mean, it's one of the things that I have been challenged by legislators, the governor's office, to consider as we move forward with a potential consideration of an alternative assessment plan. I think you got the information we sent out. There are, I believe, very valid reasons for the extension of the time, especially the performance aspect of the assessment. But I am very I'm very conscious of the increase of assessment time, but I have not heard the discussion about increasing the school year, to answer you directly. Right up here. Yeah, it's a distraction.
Thank you. I wanted to push you a little bit on the parent and the community piece.
Sure.
I think a lot of us are concerned about when anticipating everything's going to go on schedule. When park assessment rolls out, there's a potential for a drop in achievement. And so if we are not preparing our parents and community for what that looks like, it could be, really, really scary, right?
Sure.
So what plans does the state have to help support us in the communication to our parents and community members?
Thank you for that question. It's a great question. And there are a couple of states that got out ahead of this little problem. Kentucky being one. I would suggest that you pull your data and look at your college proficiency rates from ACT and SAT. That's my suggestion. I'm going to rub the crystal ball. I'll ask Mary Jane if that won't be a direct one-to-one correlation. I just want to say that, right, Mary Jane? But I think if you want to see what we are referring to as the performance cliff, everything has a cliff these days. Take a look at your ACT and SAT proficiency rates, and you're going to get a pretty good idea of what your secondary assessment, and I think you might even be able to drill that down earlier, but you're going to get a really good idea of what your secondary assessment. And I think you should talk about that. Terry Holliday, the state chief in Kentucky, I've actually plagiarized his line many times. He actually went out around the state and said, we've had this data for years. It's not any different. Our kids didn't get any worse in 1 year. Our student teachers didn't teach any worse in 1 year. We've had this data for years. Let's look at the college proficiency rates on ACT, because they are an ACT state. And let's take a look at our percentage of students who are college proficient, and that's going to give you a pretty good idea of the level of mastery of our students under Common Core. So I think that is a very good starting point, and when I have spoken to economic development folks, Chamber of Commerce folks, I have told them that repeatedly. Look at those two rates, and you should get a pretty good indication of where you are. And that's a good way to start talking about it. Yeah, go ahead. I'll repeat your question. Go ahead. No. The question was, what does the transition from FCAT to PARC look like? When PARC comes on board, we will not use FCAT. Okay? So let me talk a little bit about PARC, because you've kind of gotten to where many people across the country have become increasingly uncomfortable with a statement I made in front of the Senate Appropriations, Education Appropriations, and I made at the state board meeting. And I want to clarify it for you. And that is, I, as the state chief in Florida, must consider an alternative plan to PARC. Now, why would I say that? I have been a member of the governing board of PARC since its inception. I am on the executive committee of PARC, which is now making the highest level decisions. And so why would I say you have to have a plan B? And let me explain it to you in a lot of ways so you understand. And I want you to please leave with this belief. No one wants and believes PARC will happen any more than I do. As a matter of fact, as Mary Jane can tell you, Indiana took over procurement of parts of PARC so that we could continue to be on time. While I was doing that, I was developing a plan B in Indiana. So I always say to my colleagues, if I didn't believe I wanted PARC to work, I wouldn't have taken on procurement. I would have just pursued plan B. I was literally on the phone negotiating with the folks in Indiana yesterday morning to finish up the contracts for parks. So everything I'm about to tell you, please don't mistake that I have misgivings about parks. But let's, and I don't know if anybody's ever kind of given you this visual, but imagine a room that's not nearly this big, that you got a big tables in a square, and you got about 20 or 24 state commissioners sitting around that table. And here's what we're all going to agree to. We're all going to agree to a common assessment. Let's go back to test time. So in 2010, here we are 2013, in 2010 we were all agreeing to a test time, right? 2013, the test time comes. We are all agreeing to a common cut score. Now let's just talk about that. I'm not going to mention states' names. There are states in park today that if they agreed, which they did in principle, to a cut score that Florida will want or Indiana would want, I believe it could have a crippling effect to their education system politically. Because you would see states that would have 20 to 30% proficiency rates. What would that do to that state's education system? You have states that are currently paying $5 a test. A short multiple choice test, artificially graded, costs the state $5. What are the chances in this economy of all of those states getting that appropriation multiplied? So this whole setup of park, in my opinion, is daunting. And there will be people along the way who, for test time purposes, cost, cut short, will fall off. There is also a procurement issue. This is a huge, huge purchase. Multifaceted. You've got to be on time every day. And you're dealing with a lot of unknowns. You're dealing with bid protests. You're dealing with a lot of things. So as state chief, when I came here, I want to give Gerard and Pam and John Wynn and Eric all the cover. They couldn't say this because they agreed to be the fiscal agent. They were fiscal agents at a time when being the fiscal agent was very important. Not that it isn't important today, but you couldn't start, and Eric Smith, in his seat, he couldn't start by saying, I'm going to be the fiscal agent, oh, by the way, I'm going to develop Plan B. So I have acknowledged all of the daunting environment around park, with the belief that we're going to get it done. But I also want to make sure it's the quality we need to do what we want to do. And so what we have embarked on is a process where we are going to look at what other states are doing, and there are other states doing this, and say, is there another state that could be doing something that we like better? Is there another state that could be utilizing a different path that may better fit Florida's children? And the answer may be no. And we'll be satisfied. We'll move forward with park. But the answer may be yes, and we may have a very difficult decision to make. And at that point in time, we'll have to make a decision. But that's the reason. I just believe it's good business practice. It's good management to make sure. Because I'm not telling you anything you don't know. Florida has a strong reputation across this country on accountability. And you hold up your entire accountability system on these assessments, right? It makes no sense to have any potential exposure given that commitment to accountability. So that's the reason I have done that. But when we get to that day, 14-15, we will be prepared to pull the trigger and move from FCAT to the next generation of Common Core assessments. Yes, ma'am. I'll get you next. Go ahead.
We're working hard to help our teachers make those instructional changes. But one of we're not at one-to-one computing. We don't have the infrastructure yet. So how's the state?
Sure, great question. The question was, if you didn't hear it all, what is the state going to do around technology, given the technological demands of PARC, given the technological demands of this entire assessment concept? You don't have one-to-one computers everywhere. There are a lot of answers to that. But let me assure you of this. I truly believe in my heart that when we get to the end of the day in PARC, or we get to the end of the day in the next generation of assessment, there will have to be a paper-pencil option. Mary Jane, do you agree? There will have to be a paper-pencil option. I just believe that. I'm rubbing a crystal ball, so don't take it as gospel. But, you know, go back to that table, those tables of 20 people. Let's talk about Maine, who is not in PARC but in Smarter Balance. You know, let's talk about Louisiana. Let's talk about a lot of places where there are areas that they don't have good connectivity. One of the things that we are now involved in is trying to get a true measure of your load capacities in your districts. Just to give you a little background, in 2010, the then state chief in Indiana made this really bold statement that we were going to assess X percentage of our 3rd through 8th graders online. And we rolled it out. We did it, with surveys that the districts filled out, and we had over 200 crashes. Okay? We had over 200 crashes. And you know what? It wasn't because the districts gave us bad information. It's not. And part of the problem was our vendor. Huge part of the problem was our vendor. Part of the problem was us. So after that, our vendor came in and actually load tested our districts and our schools for us. Put an artificial load on the bandwidth to the point where the assessment would do the same to see if it would bring the bandwidth down. The next year, we had, I know of one major outage, and it was because a car had a telephone pole. But because we knew the data of our load. We had also done many things to expand the use of technology in the buildings through flexibility around instructional materials. So I think part of your fear is, I think we all talked about this as 100% solution, 100% technology. While this year, 2013, my former employer, they will test 100% of their 3rd through 8th graders online. But we know the bandwidth's there, we know the hardware's there, we can do that. I should say they can do that. But I never believed we wouldn't have some paper pencil backup on this. It just doesn't make sense. Yes, ma'am. Oh, I'm sorry, no, I promised you. My fault.
Dr. Bennett, thank you, first of all, for your comments about teachers and their value in the classroom. I think we need to recognize our teachers more throughout this process. You talked a lot about timelines and the fact that we were going to try to stick to our timelines. One of their concerns when we talk about teachers is performance pay. And as we move forward, transitioning from 2.0, I've heard you talk about the value-added model and other models. Is there conversation between the department and legislators on this process and the timeline and what will need to take place in order for all this to come together?
Sure. Yes, there has been a lot of discussion around 736 and what we will do around evaluation and compensation, because your point's incredibly well taken. While we're talking today about Common Core, we're also talking about assessments, and because those assessments are germane to evaluation and compensation, we probably, those shouldn't be off the table either. I think one of the things I've learned in the short time I've been here is we've dug into 736 pretty deeply, and I think we need to refocus ourselves in the department on the guidance we're providing around that issue, because I'll tell you what I read, without getting into great detail. I read there's a lot more flexibility for us to do things at the district level than what I think districts have either believed been led to believe around these issues. Okay, so one of the things you're going to see us do is ramp up our guidance efforts around what are ways to do this. Because again, there are ways to do it on the timeline. But I mean, we have to be bold enough to make some tweaks to the process. I mean, there's no question. I think there has to be a discussion around, are there places in the legislation that we really probably need to change? And then once we get there, I think we have to drive a very aggressive and intentional guidance process, technical assistance process for you to get there. And we're going to do that. Yeah, go ahead. Just somebody stand up and then we'll get it to you. Now, I promised Mary Jane we'd stop at about 20 after 10 because she needs about 10 minutes of your time.
Good morning.
Good morning.
My question is, Race to the Top has been very helpful in helping, I'm from a small rural district, in helping us transition to our new evaluation models, and also recently training our teachers with the Common Core pedagogy that they're going to need to make that transition to Common Core and hopefully eventually PART. My question is, will there be additional Race to the Top grant application opportunities? A district like mine could really benefit from those additional resources to keep the process moving forward. And then secondly, someone in the back mentioned the concept of extending the school year. For a small rural district that is about 90% free and reduced lunch, regression learning is a challenge for us. And I would just encourage you to do what you can to facilitate the concept of extending the school year.
Thanks for that comment. I mean, I'm not a researcher about any stretch of imagination, but I haven't read it that says less school is better. So, I'm a guy that, I was told my kids when I was administrator in their district, and we would be talking about these issues, and I would be talking about how we went from the school day, and my son, who to say he loves school would be a drastic oversight, would say, Dad, my friends don't like this, and I said, son, I'm for everything your friends hate. I'm for a longer school day, a longer school week, and a longer school year. Just know that. I want to, I'm not here to make you happy. So I understand and agree. I think, again, there is a huge discussion in the state about that. I don't want to say huge discussion. I've heard some discussion. But it hasn't been so much about the lengthening of the year as much as the arrangement of 180 days. Your other question around Race to the Top is a very interesting question. I do not see in this environment of sequestration more federal money coming to us. Matter of fact, I think the opposite is very likely. But one of the challenges and one of the things that we try to do in Indiana, that you have my pledge I'm going to try to do here, is focus our resources in the department. Please don't take this as a criticism of Florida. This is a criticism of state education agencies across the country. I deal with a lot of them. State education agencies across the country believe everything's important. And when you believe everything's important, what happens? Nothing is important. So I say to myself, what are the big bets? What are the big bets? And in my mind, I can tell you our big bets. Common Core, assessment, educator effectiveness, accountability, school accountability, teacher accountability, student achievement as the overarching thought. And if we focus on those things and we fund those things, and we find ways to drive funds to those things from the state, I think we can help But we have to be, I think, as a state education agency, we have to be much more intentional. So I'm going to use this. While you didn't ask this, you gave me a perfect segue. Just so you know, I want to give you very quickly my vision of how state agencies should work and how I pledge to you. And if we don't work this way, I want you to let me know. Okay? My email address is tony.bennett@fldoe.org. That comes right to me. It's not the one that has commissioner on the front that like 6 people see before it gets to me. If we don't follow this, and we aren't following this, by the time next school year starts, I want to know. Because I believe a good state agency serves you best when the state agency sets expectations. Very simply says, this is what we expect school districts and schools to do for the children of our state. And on the other end of the spectrum, we hold people accountable for those expectations. And in the middle, we tell you the things we've heard from across the country and around the state that work best, but you make the decision. That's called local control. That works best in my mind. So my goal is to have a state agency that gets you to yes in making those decisions in the middle. And if we get to no quickly, I need to know. You know, one of the things I very much appreciate about Secretary Duncan is every time he and I converse, he will say, let me know how the department's in your way. And I did. I did. And every time I do, I come back feeling guilty. I used to say this to our staff in Indiana. I said, you know, I had a conversation with Secretary Duncan, just complained to him about something that was going on in the department. And you know what? I feel pretty guilty because I wonder how many of our districts say the same thing about us. You know, as a district administrator, I never believed in my heart that the state education agency knew what it was doing. Honestly. Let's just do this. Let's have a little fun. Show of hands if you believe the state education agency really knows what it's doing. Okay? So, and I think some of that goes back to that thing about everything being important. And some of that goes to the fact that we should be trusting you to make those decisions on how to meet expectations. So if we're in your way, I need to know. And we need to clear out the underbrush to get it to you. Some people refer to it as compliance and service. I don't think about it in those terms. I say it's about expectations, accountability, and local control in the middle. So I hope what we are able to do in the months to come is to think about what we do inside the agency to drive, in the absence of federal money, to potentially help drive resources to your needs. Yeah, please stand up. Go ahead.
I'll pass the microphone in just a moment. Your second transformation, dealing with teachers and following up on the gentleman's comment about the value of teachers and the instructional transformations that need to take place. I think we have extensive research and information and knowledge that shows that professional learning and collaboration among teachers is the foundation for teachers to grow and improve. And I think our evaluation system is emphasizing that. The state having expectations, the state holding us accountable, the state providing resources for us to make local decisions is indeed helpful. However, I think when we're looking at a state system that we're trying to pull together and share across Common Core and instructional paradigm shifts, there is a need for at least a level of foundation that exists statewide that would support professional learning. There is no line item in the budget from the state that supports professional learning, and that has resulted in dollars being in the FEFP that are now and have been negotiable for a long time. Therefore, we have had uneven implementation of our state protocol standards for professional learning that are critical and we're front runners in the state in that area. However, I would just encourage you and the department and the legislature, to look at the fact that how much teachers do that is very critical to their success and their students' success that does not occur on the clock when students are present in schools. And professional learning, in my opinion, needs far better support systemically from our state in order to achieve that transformation.
Let me respond to that. Please don't take anything I say as being argumentative. I agree a lot with a lot of what you said. I would say this, as a person who worked at the district level for a long time, who was really trying to change the way teachers teach, we didn't change our professional development delivery to do that. And if we're really going to transform teaching, we can't use the old system of sit and get professional development. And I think I would suggest, and I don't want to speak for the Board of Legislators because I have not had this conversation with them. I can speak from the mouths of legislators I've worked with in the past that the reason in many instances there has been a hesitation is because they weren't convinced we were really transforming that professional development model, that delivery model. And so I think there has to be a very intentional discussion about that. What does professional development look like that is meaningful, job embedded? How do we know it's getting the results we want? And I think we have, and I'm going to use the word we, because I throw the department in partnership with you on this, we have to make the case on how we're doing it differently to transform that instructional delivery. And I think, again, I'll take responsibility for this in my former life. I don't think I did a very good job of that as a superintendent. And I think we need to be thinking about how we're doing that and delivering that. I would agree with you. The only thing I would say, and I know most of you in here are administrators. I have a daughter who's a teacher. Matter of fact, she's in her first year. She just finished her first year of teaching. She and I had a very interesting discussion over Christmas. She said to me, "Dad, you don't know how much I work after school." And I said, "Trish, so did I come home every night and go, blah, 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 blah?" She goes, "No, you work." I said, "That's what professionals do. That is what professionals do." And while I am very sympathetic to that, I do think that that argument sometimes rings very hollow with our general population. And I'm speaking from a person who has, again, done these discussions across the state. I agree teachers spend an incredible amount of time. My wife is a former teacher and a principal. My daughter is now a teacher. I was a teacher. I know how much time I spent. But I also know I knew that when I got into the job. I also knew that. So what we should be talking about isn't that. We should be talking about what do we need to do to transform the skill set to a 21st century. That's the discussion we need to have. And I think when we move to that discussion, I think we're going to find a lot of common ground with people on making the investment. Now, I'll also say this because of the time of year it is with the international scene going on over in Rome. I have also dealt with state legislatures, and again, I'm not making this comment about Florida because I haven't experienced to its fullest extent yet. There are two things that, as we used to say, as I used to say in Southern Indiana, they could easily be married because they're not related, is education policy and fiscal policy. When we as a country, and I think Race to the Top was the first time we ever saw this, by the way. Race to the Top was the first time you ever saw an intentional marriage of fiscal policy and education policy. 4 big policy discussions: standards and assessment, longitudinal data, turning around our lowest performing school, great teachers and leaders. And here's money. Fiscal policy and ed policy. I always said in Indiana, I love to watch the legislature every 2 years go through the budget process. Because they stuck 12 guys in a room, 12 men and women in a room on the 4th floor of the Indiana State House. And I used to say, when the smoke came out of the chimney, they would say, "Hey, we know how to fund education." And at the same time, there were 12 other people in a different room saying, we know what it takes to improve education, and they never taught that. So this whole discussion about resources to PD is a discussion that I think Race to the Top gave us a very good example of. And that is, how do we put our education policies and our fiscal policies together so that when we do make investments like this, we are maximizing the investment. That's, to me, the discussion we have to have. So I am now at 20 after, and Mary Jane is telling me we've got the cane out. I want to tell you how wonderful it's been to be with you this morning. I look forward to working with you. Please don't hesitate to call us, and do not hesitate to let us know if you need to get to yes to improve life for your kids, to improve the academic experience for your kids, and we are not responding. I need to know. Because our job, if we're going to hold you accountable, I believe we have to help you get to the place you need to get to help kids learn. Thank you very much.